I was 16 when my skull hit a row of lockers hard enough to make the metal ring. Blood slid into my eye, and the hallway went so quiet I could hear the buzzing lights. He leaned in close, smiling like this was entertainment, like I was a problem he'd just solved. What he didn't notice was the tiny red light winking in the corner, and the fact that my dad, the man I hadn't told about any of this, was the FBI assistant director already getting that footage on his secure phone. If it were you, what would you have done? Scream, swing, freeze, pretend it didn't happen. My name is Zora Washington, and I'm going to tell you how a shiny school in an affluent zip code turned into a pressure cooker, how a bully with a last name on a gym thought he owned the hallways, and how a camera blinked at exactly the right moment. I'm going to show you where silence almost took me apart, and where one choice, one hard, complicated choice, turned everything around. I arrived at Oak Ridge High with a plan not for popularity, not for a picture in a yearbook, but for a lab. Oak Ridge had a real lab, glassware you don't get at normal schools, machines that hum like they know secrets, and a partnership that lets seniors do research with Johns Hopkins. I'm the girl who tapes scientific articles to her wall instead of posters, who memorizes enzymes like other kids memorize song lyrics. First month I kept my head down, books held high like armor steps, quick voice soft, be invisible, get to the lab, build a future, you know what I mean? 2,000 students. 27 black kids, and one crown prince with a name carved in stone over the gym his grandfather funded. Bradley Richardson moved like the building belonged to him, blue eyes, tennis tan that air-rich kids get, where even their apologies sound like you should thank them. Somebody once said he was valedictorian by default, like gravity, and everybody nodded. I didn't plan to take anything from him, I just took a chemistry test. Mr. Peterson had this old-school ritual where he wrote the top 5 scores on the whiteboard, initials and percentages, like a leaderboard for brains. That day the order flipped. ZW sat at the top, BR dropped to second, and the kind of silence that isn't silence at all spread across the room. I didn't look at him, he looked at me. He started small, that's how it works. A shoulder brush that knocked my books down. Sorry, didn't see you there, with a smile that said he absolutely did. Group chats about study sessions that somehow didn't include me. Whispers as I passed. Diversity admit quota affirmative action experiment. Always said just loud enough to hear, always slippery enough to deny. Each incident too small to file a report without sounding dramatic, so you don't file, you adjust. Step wider. Sit near doorways, pretend the library is home. At home I stayed quiet. My mom, Natalie, had a new cardiology schedule. Late nights, double shifts, 1,000 tiny emergencies that do not leave room for teenage drama. My dad's job, well, his work doesn't come home, it just follows him like a shadow. He investigates hate crimes. He has seen what people do when they think no one will hold them accountable, and he has to stare at it until it blinks. He calls me Supernova, promises this is the last move before college so I can finally root. I believed him. I still do. Then I scored a perfect 100 on the next exam. Mr. Peterson said my name said MIT summer program, and the smile Bradley gave me was the kind people wear to church when they're angry at God. The microaggressions graduated to something uglier. A drawing of a monkey in a lab coat on my desk hair like mine. My gym clothes soaked, hanging heavy and cold. The word painted across my parking space in permanent marker that I won't repeat here. Notes in my locker. Go back to the ghetto N-word, girls don't belong at Oak Ridge, science experiment gone wrong. I stood in my bathroom that night with the fan roaring and cried quiet so my mother wouldn't hear, then ripped the notes up and flushed them because evidence and shame can look the same when you're 16. Pattern interrupt. It gets worse. Maya noticed. You need at least one person who sees you when you're trying to be invisible. And for me, that was Maya Chen, my lab partner with a color-coded brain. After winter break, she blocked the bathroom door with both hands and said, "What's wrong, and don't you dare say nothing." I told her the medium version of the truth, enough to test what would happen next. "We're reporting this," she said. And she said it like a decision, not a suggestion. Principal Whitaker's office smelled like new leather and donor dinners. He listened with the kind of face you make when you're waiting for your coffee to cool. When I showed him the notes, he waved a hand. Anonymous could be anyone. When I said Bradley's name, he leaned back and said the sentence that made my stomach drop. Bradley comes from one of our most respected families. Are you sure you're not being overly sensitive to normal competitive behavior? Do you think that's fair? I left that office numb and on fire at the same time. A secretary I liked whispered that Bradley's father had bankrolled Whitaker's state senate run that went nowhere. Funny how generosity buys patience in a principal. The next day, Bradley got bolder, loud jokes about playing the race card study groups, announced in front of me that I still wasn't invited to a choir of kids who laughed because laughing keeps you close to power. My body absorbed the pressure like a sponge. Insomnia headaches, grades fraying at the edges. A to A minus to B plus. I quit Science Olympiad because I couldn't stand to be trapped in a room where his voice sat in the center like a king on a chair. One afternoon, he accidentally spilled chocolate milk all over my biology project, the cell model I'd hand-built for weeks. Brown seeped into every careful line while he did an apology dance. Hands up, smile on eyes, saying the opposite. Clumsy me guessed some projects just aren't meant to succeed. Mr. Peterson assigned a stats project that would decide a third of our grade partners matched for complementary skills. Somehow I ended up alone because you can handle it, and Bradley landed with his best friend who can't operate a graphing calculator without help. Fine. I stayed late 3 weeks in a row, running models, cleaning data, documenting every step, because that's what strong looks like when you're outnumbered. The morning it was due, I opened my drive and saw nothing, my files wiped. The backup USB in my backpack, bent unreadable. When I cornered Bradley in the hallway, he shrugged. Sounds like user error. Maybe you're not as good with tech as you think. Besides, everyone knows Mrs. Henderson grades black students easier. That's when Mr. Johnson found me staring at a microscope like it might tell me what to do. He closed the door, said softly, "I believe you," then said 3 words that would turn everything. Documentation, evidence, community. We had a diversity assembly, one of those glossy shows with careful language and a slideshow that could put a hummingbird to sleep. Bradley raised his hand and asked, "Is reverse racism real? Like when less qualified people get opportunities because of skin color?" He said it with his face all sincerity, and his friends snickered under their breath. People turned and looked at me like I could answer for every structural lie in this country. I stared at my knees and breathed. Maya changed strategy. She started recording. Dates, times, screenshots, every comment, every bump, every time an adult watched and didn't intervene. Her cousin at Georgetown texted us, "Evidence is everything." Maybe that phrase should be carved above the entrance to every school. I wasn't sure it would matter, but keeping records felt like holding a rope in a dark room. Then came the locker room. I don't want to tell this part, but I'm going to. Sarah, Bradley's on-off girlfriend, looked at my hair like it was a puzzle she could fix. "How do you even wash that? Looks like steel wool. You use Brillo pads or what?" The laughter that followed tried to sound nervous, but came out mean. I turned away, hands on my own locker, because my mother raised me with a very old rule: keep your hands until you absolutely have to use them. Heather, student council president, chimed in, "Careful, Sarah, her kind get violent when they're angry. Haven't you seen the videos? I walked out before I cried because the one thing they wanted was tears they could call overreaction." The hallway outside was empty and loud at the same time, fluorescent hum, echoing steps, rows of blue metal like a tunnel. Bradley stepped into my path, shoulders square, smile gone. "Running away. Thought you people were tough." I tried to slide by. "You don't understand your place," he said, and something in me stopped pretending to be small. "I earned my place," I said, steady voice, eyes up. His face shifted. Not anger, something colder. "You calling my dad a liar? You think you're smarter than me, than my family?" His hand slammed into my shoulder. My back hit the locker. My bag spilled pens like teeth across tile. He leaned in, breath steady. "No college is picking some ghetto monkey over me, no matter what your test scores say. I will not give those words more space here than they already took in my body." From the corner of my eye, I saw a blink of red, a new security camera they'd installed after winter break. Maya appeared at the end of the hall, took in the scene in 1 second, and ran. Bradley kept talking lower now, the voice people use when they want only you to hear. "One word from my dad and your applications disappear. Another word and maybe your dad loses his job." That threat cut through fear like a knife, because humiliation is one thing, but a hand around your future, a hand around your father's paycheck, that's something else. "My friend is Korean American, not Chinese," I said when he threw out a slur at Maya, "but I wouldn't expect someone with your limited intelligence to understand distinctions." His jaw-clenched hands grabbed my shoulders, slammed me again. My head snapped back into metal stars popped behind my eyes. Nausea rose hard and his fingers touched my throat. Not squeezing, not yet, just making a promise. "You're nothing but..." He didn't finish because a voice cut the air like a siren. "Hey, step away from her. Mr. Johnson." 2 of Bradley's tennis guys hovered 30 feet back, not helping, just witnessing. The school security officer jogged in slow, the kind of slow that says he already decided what he thinks happened. Paramedics don't do politics. One look, one checklist, one sentence. Likely concussion, bruising at the throat, immobilized the neck. Whitaker arrived with a face that looked like a headache. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Our policy is to handle this internally. He said mutual combat like we had gloved up and touched fists at a bell. The paramedic tightening my neck brace looked up and said, "No, sir. That's not what this is. Do you think that's fair?" In the ER, my mother's scrub smelled like coffee and sanitizer, and her jaw was set in a line. I know means she is doing math. Damages recovery time off work, emotions she will not let show yet. Dr. Wilson, mid-40s, crisp voice, laid it out. Concussion, mild to moderate bruising on the back, consistent with impact marks on the throat, inconsistent with a fall. Translation: she didn't trip. My father showed up with his badge in his hand like a reflex his body couldn't stop, and the look on his face when he stepped out to answer his phone is a look I won't forget. The one he gets when a case stops being a case and becomes personal. Here's the part where the story flips, where the hallway becomes a map. That night, my father watched the security footage on a secure server. He saw his daughter assaulted, that's one layer, and he also saw something else, a pattern. Isolate the victim block. The exits escalate the threat, perform for witnesses at a distance so they learn the hierarchy. He had seen that choreography before in briefings about recruitment rituals, the way certain groups teach kids to prove their loyalty. Small acts of cruelty, first, bigger acts later. And then a name in the file cabinet of his brain lit up. Richardson. He'd seen the father, Lawrence, in a case file, a sophisticated network that called itself the Heritage Protection Alliance, the kind of polite name that lets hate wear a blazer. He'd filed Lawrence under peripheral donor, the man who writes checks but keeps his hands clean. Now he watched his daughter's head hit metal and wondered if he'd been very wrong. My dad did the hardest, most disciplined thing I have ever watched him do. He recused himself. He called his superior and said the words that put a wall up between his job and his family to make sure the case wouldn't get thrown out on a technicality. He asked that Agent Teresa Rodriguez lead this slice of the investigation with priority status. And he meant it. Rules exist for moments like this, even when they hurt. Then the Richardson camp made a mistake. Their attorney sent a letter, polite language baked over a threat, regret about an unfortunate incident, hints that any allegation of racism would be defamatory, and an offer to cover medical bills in exchange for silence. That letter didn't land the way they hoped. It went into an evidence bag. My dad called Teresa and said, "You have attempted witness intimidation in a federal civil rights context." They didn't know the spark they'd just handed over. Evidence started lining up like soldiers who suddenly heard a whistle. Maya brought spreadsheets, video clips, timestamps, a diary of microaggressions that stopped looking micro in a list. Mr. Johnson wrote a statement that was both personal and damning. 12 years at Oak Ridge, the pattern of protecting certain students, 6 promising black kids who transferred after similar treatment. Other students spoke. A Hispanic junior called slurs at practice, a Muslim sophomore whose hijab was yanked as a joke, a Vietnamese freshman who endured accent mockery every time he answered in class. Threads connected. Financial analysts traced donations from entities that looked respectable until you follow the money through shells into Richardson Development. Encrypted chats recovered from an HPA member referenced a promising recruit at a certain school putting restoration into practice. Restoration, a word that sounds like fixing an old house and means something much darker here. Twist. The part that changed everything I thought about the last 6 months. The communications mentioned the FBI agent's daughter. It wasn't just jealousy over grades, not just cruelty for sport. I had been chosen. Picked as a target to send a message to a man who hunts these people for a living. Yeah, that happened. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. At 6:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, people in 3 states woke up to pounding on their doors. Agents executed warrants at 17 locations. A news helicopter hovered over a mansion with a circular driveway, while a man in silk pajamas under an overcoat tried to look dignified in handcuffs. By noon, every network had a version of the same headline: FBI exposes white nationalist network in elite schools. The polite lies peeled back. Donors, school board members, judges. The Heritage Protection Alliance was not a message board. It was a machine built to move influence and ideology with clean hands and dirty hearts. Oak Ridge shook. Whitaker was placed on leave. The school board held a meeting that devolved fast. Parents, angry teachers, tense, students brave and shaking as they stepped up to a microphone to say what they'd been carrying. Bradley didn't show. His socials went dark. His friends scrubbed group chats like you can bleach away a pattern. In a press conference, Agent Rodriguez didn't mince words. Conspiracy to violate civil rights, witness intimidation, financial crimes tied to laundering money for extremist organizations. In Lawrence's case, communications advocating violence against federal officials, potential domestic terrorism exposure. Hearing those phrases out loud in that setting did something to my breathing. It made the world feel both bigger and smaller at once. Then came a curveball. Bradley's mother, Catherine, through her attorney, offered to cooperate. She described a house where heritage was an ideology, where peaceful resegregation was a phrase people said at dinner, where a father told his son it was his duty to maintain the school's character by making sure certain kids felt unwelcome enough to leave. I listened to a summary of her statement and felt two equal and opposite reactions, heat rising for all the days she said nothing, and a complicated empathy for someone bent around the shape of a controlling man's beliefs. Two truths can sit in the same chair. It doesn't mean either one gets to excuse the harm. Digital forensics pulled at the net and found bigger fish. Local politicians sending emails that sounded like winks, business leaders laundering intent through philanthropy. Even two federal judges who had accepted donations from entities with scrubbed names and stained money. What started with a slam in a hallway rewired a map of power. That should scare you. It scares me. Meanwhile, I healed. Concussions are strange. Lights became knives. Doors closing felt like threats. The world tilted at odd moments. Therapy helped. So did sleep in actual hours. So did my mother's hands braiding my hair while we didn't talk about the worst parts. The bigger healing took longer. Shame has a way of convincing you that telling will make it worse. Mr. Johnson said, "Your voice is yours. You can use it for you, or if you want, you can use it for the ones who can't." I picked a journalist I trusted. We set rules and boundaries, lawyers in the room, and I told the story, not like a spectacle, but like a record. The response was a river. Messages from kids in places that looked like postcards. Teachers who whispered that they were tired of looking away. Parents who asked what questions to ask before writing a check. Hashtags for a week policy memos after that. 8 months after the hallway, I walked into a federal courtroom and read a victim impact statement with a voice that trembled twice and then steadied. I said the obvious thing no one wants to say, that this wasn't about one bad boy. It was about a system that taught him entitlement and wrapped it in vocabulary to make it sound like values about adults who chose connections over children, about institutions that say zero tolerance in brochures and tolerate quite a lot when the last name is on a building. I looked up and saw my father in the front row, eyes bright with something I think was pride and sorrow welded together. I saw the judge's face soften in a way that made me believe the law remembers human things sometimes. Lawrence got 15 years. Others got less, but not nothing. The courtroom stayed quiet because sometimes justice lands like a stone in a pond and the ripples move under the surface. Outside, microphones crowded like bees. Agent Rodriguez said the words about courage and kids that deserve to be said. I kept it short. I was exhausted. Now the part that will split the comments in half. Bradley didn't go to prison. Because of his age, his mom's cooperation, and the way juvenile justice works, he took a plea, community service counseling, an intensive program designed to pull kids back from the edge when their families have dragged them to it. At first he showed up and checked boxes, then he broke. I know because I sat across from him in a supervised restorative justice meeting that I agreed to against my instincts with counselors and lawyers and a second hand that sounded too loud. He looked at the table the whole time and said, "I can't undo it. I'm trying to understand why I became someone who could do that." I listened. I didn't absolve him and I didn't call him a monster because that label lets systems off the hook. I told him the truth. Your choices hurt me. They were yours. You were taught poison at home, and now it's on you to choose something else when no one is watching. If it were you, would you accept that apology? Would you want him locked away anyway? Where does accountability end and redemption begin? Back at Oak Ridge, real change took root in plain ground. The interim principal, Dr. Anita Sharma, wrote policies that had teeth. An anonymous reporting system that didn't feed into the same office that writes donor thank you notes. Mandatory bias training that was not a slideshow and a signature but conflict scenarios. Consequences follow up. Mr. Johnson took on a new role, diversity and inclusion coordinator with actual authority to investigate and refer for discipline. It wasn't perfect, it was better, and better is not a small thing when you didn't think better was possible. Maya and I built something too. We sat in a terrible fluorescent room with 6 kids and a whiteboard and wrote out what we wished we'd had. We called it Students Against Discrimination. Sad because the name tells the truth and because the acronym sticks. We shared templates for documentation scripts for approaching administration flowcharts for escalation, a list of attorneys doing pro bono work, a guide for teachers who want to help but don't know how to be brave without losing their jobs. Chapters popped up in towns we'd never been to, and the first time we presented to the state education board, we watched people twice our age take notes on our slides, like we were giving them a map out of a maze they built. One night, my father stood in our kitchen with a coffee he wasn't drinking and said, "My work put you in danger, and I didn't see what was right in front of me. I'm sorry." I said the truest thing I had. The system failed me, and Bradley made choices. You taught me to stand up, and I did. He nodded. We are better now at being honest, which I think is a kind of safety no door lock can give you. My mom took what we went through and built a community outreach program at her hospital to tackle racial disparities in care. Because inequity doesn't live in one building, it spreads, and you have to chase it across systems. Sometimes I still park in front of Oak Ridge and taste metal. I still see a red blink in the corner of my eye in rooms that don't even have cameras. Then I remember something that messes with the narrative people like to tell. The camera did not save me. People did. Maya running Mr. Johnson, shouting a paramedic telling the truth in a hallway where truth was not welcome, a doctor naming what happened without softening it, an FBI team doing the job the way it should be done, a community of students deciding not to shut up for once. The camera mattered, but the people mattered more. Here's where I leave you with questions that matter more than my name or my school. What do we do with kids like Bradley when the system that shaped them is finally visible? Do we throw them away forever, or do we demand a level of accountability that includes the possibility of change? What do we do with adults who looked away because mortgages and reputations are real? Do we brand them complicit forever, or do we build a path back that requires honesty and repair, not just a workshop and a memo? What do we do about institutions that cash checks from men like Lawrence, then say they had no idea where the money came from? How long does that stain last, and how do we clean it without pretending it was never there? Do you think that's fair, or does fairness even apply when harm is this organized? If you were in my shoes on that floor, head-wringing, breath-shaky words stuck, what would you have done? Yell, fight, freeze, wait for help. If you were my dad, would you have stayed on the right side of the glass, or would you have kicked it down to get to the people who hurt your kid? Drop your thoughts in the comments, argue with me if you need to tell me where I'm being too generous or not generous enough. Tell me what your school or your workplace does when the person with the last name on the building crosses a line. Share this with someone who thinks it's just kids being kids, with a teacher who wants to do the right thing but needs backup, with a parent who believes nice neighborhoods are inoculation against ugly truth. If Zora's story, my story, hit a nerve, hit like so the conversation gets bigger. Subscribe if you want more stories that turn pain into policy and policy into protection, and tell me your own. The time you spoke up, the time you couldn't, the time you wish you had. I was 16 when a bully slammed me into a locker and told me my place. Today I'm telling you mine. At the mic, in the lab, at the table where decisions get made. And if that makes someone uncomfortable, good. That's usually where change begins.